There were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.
Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
These are the words that lingered in our dreams following the bedtime fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. But the words have come a long way since first being written, and Jack is no longer required reading material for the technologically driven youth of today. However, the question I asked my parents was if in fact giants were real, but the question was never fully answered all those years ago. The opening words taken from Genesis, "There were giants on the earth in those days," would suggest this phenomenon is age-old. But on deeper analysis, things are not as they first seemed, or dictated to us from the pulpit. In the original texts, it read, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that." The Christian scribes mistranslated Nephilim to mean giants. However, its correct use actually refers to those that came down. Some suggested they came from another planet or reality, but there are more reasonable suggestions being put forward. It is quite possible that those that came down had fallen from Greece. If places such as Karsak, which later had its name changed to Eden, were placed in the eastern Taurus Mountains and Armenian highlands, it is more probable that those people known as the Nephilim were wise men who, for whatever reason, got kicked out of their own habitats in the mountains. Now, with the green behind my ears beginning to turn brown in the approach of my autumn years, I find myself asking the question as to whether giants ever truly did exist, or was it simply myth? However, to do this, I had to get off my backside and seek the answers myself. A common theme within the world of mythology is the recurrent accounts of giants. Our bookshelves could easily be filled with the numerous and allegedly honest accounts of people that have supposedly unearthed the remains of giants, only to have the bones confiscated or any trace of possible evidence disappearing before being presented to the population as a whole. There are accounts that can cast shadows of doubt that these are just mere fairy tales. For instance, in 1613, workmen working near the castle of Charmont, near Saint-Ouen, discovered an arrangement of large bones inside a sand pit. Nearly 18 feet down, they discovered a brick tomb that measured over 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. Inside the tomb lay an enormous skeleton that was over 25 feet in length. An inscription on the outside of the tomb read, "Turiboktus Rex." Other artifacts found around the tomb also included medals and coins, and they concluded that they had uncovered the tomb of Turiboktus, the giant king of the Cimbri. The bones were allegedly identified and attested to by Dr. Morriser, a local surgeon. However, as with many of these stories surrounding the tall tales of giants and their discovered remains, the truth can often be hidden amongst the deception. It was only a matter of time before evidence was revealed that Morriser had paid heavy coin and purchased the various sized bones from the workmen who made the discovery in the pit. His office must have looked like a Peruvian fake ancient alien production line. It seems, as the story unfolded, Morriser had fabricated the surrounding details of the find himself, and finally, when the bones were pieced together, the workmen had actually uncovered the remains of a prehistoric mastodon. But are we to believe that all the stories of giants are equally as far-fetched? It would seem not. Interlaced among the sleight of hand and outright deceit, there are a growing number of accounts that could actually support the possibility that there were beings much taller than us, that once upon a time roamed this fine green earth with us, side by side. At least that's how the stories that were brought back by various sailors to us here in the West would have us believe. Accounts of giants from Patagonia all the way to the Solomon Islands in the Pacific speak of people of extreme stature, but all have conflicting sizes, ranging from over 6 foot to 10 foot in height. This, it seems, included both males and females. One such instance is given to us by Douglas Coit in 1766. He was one of the captains of the Bougainville that sailed through the Magellan Strait between Argentina and Chile. One of his officers measured the least tall of 6 natives who came to the shore to meet them. The native measured 1/4 of an inch less than 6 feet, but it was also noted that the others were considerably taller. My own personal opinion is that these accounts, although intriguing, are simply just that, as they lack any supporting evidence or proof. But the deeper we descend into the rabbit hole, the more enticing the promise of proof resounds. Within the borders of the United States, lists the length of your arm of giant bone discoveries are recorded, yet for the most part they have fallen to the west side. Many of these early accounts are brought to us by would-be archaeologists and stem around finds mostly inside the Native American burial mounds. One such account from the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology makes claim of the body that was discovered inside one of the Etowah mounds. Stone A, a stone silpuka, 25 feet wide by 8 feet long and 2 feet deep, was formed by placing steatite slabs on edge at the sides and ends, and the others across the top. The bottom consisted simply of earth hardened by fire. It contained the remains of a single skeleton lying on its back, with the head facing east. The frame was heavy and 7 foot long. Another reported set of remains were uncovered in the mound and recorded in the History of Kentucky by Lewis Collins. This time in Kentucky, the in-depth report is careful to list the grave in detail. It reads, "From a mound on the farm of Edwin Burroughs, near Franklin, were exhumed in May 1841, at the depth of over 12 feet, several human skeletons. One of extraordinary dimensions was found between what appeared to have been 2 logs covered with a wooden slab. Many of the bones were interred. The under jawbone was large enough to fit over the jaw, flesh and all, of any common man of the present day. The thigh bones were 6 inches longer than those of any man in Simpson County. Teeth, arms, ribs and all gave evidence of a giant of a former race." With such numerous encounters of these types of remains, I found it amazing that they were simply falling through the cracks of history and disappearing. In regard to the American giants, it seems a group of men who refused to accept such claims, and I suspect proof of possible giants, began their campaign to revise history from 1851. It was initially started by E.G. Squire, but decades later, Gerald Folk attempted to discredit even the work of his fellow researchers in the Bureau of Ethnology. The real wizard behind the curtain, though, came in the form of Alice Hittringa, curator of anthropology of the Smithsonian in 1903. Both within his scholarly work and public events, he made a point of claiming that all the reports of 8-foot giants are exaggerations. I can't help but wonder, did he mean the actual size of these remains were exaggerated, or the fact that these large remains being discovered was exaggeration? It soon became clear that this phenomenon of giants was global. The wonderfully bountiful fields of legend and myth were bursting with such tales, but, just like the accounts previously mentioned, they lacked any such proof to substantiate such beliefs. It wasn't until I brought my attention back to my own island of Ireland that the prospect of proof began to raise its bony hand. Ireland has a rich history of giants, both in its mythology and evidence of hard skeletal remains, and to find it I was going to have to travel the length and breadth of the country on the search for any hope of verification. Or was it all going to be just a tall tale? The poem, delivered by the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk, beginning with Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum, may actually have origins in the old Gaelic language, indicating at least a belief in giants which stems back hundreds, if not thousands of years. The verse has gone under some changes as expected over the years, but Charles Mackay proposes in his book The Gaelic Etymology of the Languages of Western Europe that this unusual opening phrase is the phrase of ancient Gaelic, which translates from Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum into behold food, good to eat, sufficient for my hunger. Hunger or not, I had a hunt on my hands. My first search brought me north to a sleepy island off the coast of County Donegal. It was on this beach, back in 1954, that a couple of council workers uncovered the remains of what could only be described as a giant. It seems the body may have been washed up and lodged in the sand, and some preliminary dates would suggest this happened around 500 years ago. The remains were also found with a number of coins and other artifacts which subsequently vanished. It was estimated that the remains uncovered from the 8-inch deep sand grave measured 7 foot 8 inches, and a quick inspection by a local dentist confirmed he was probably in his late teens or early 20s at the time of his demise. However, a new mystery has risen from the grave surrounding the remains. It seems he was interred in the local island cemetery called Kilbride. However, when they opened the unmarked grave and removed the remains for inspection in 2018, they discovered remains of a different body, which measured 6 foot in length. Not only was it the wrong body, but this unfortunate cadaver was also missing its skull. It seems the remains may have been laid to rest in another location within the cemetery walls, and further hopes to find the bones with the intention of recovering DNA samples for analysis is ongoing. Travelling south this time to County Cork promised a little more in the lines of solid proof. Arriving in the quaint fishing village of Kinsale, it seems they have embraced one of their local historical figures that went by the name of Patrick Cotter O'Brien. Patrick was born on the 19th of January 1760 and lived in a cottage near the shore. Starting his working life as a bricklayer, he kept himself to himself. His unusual size of 8 foot 1 inch saw him restricting his movements and averting the public eye for a time, only walking in circles in a small walled garden at the rear of the cottage. At over 8 foot, we are already challenging the claims of Alice Heatherwick, the former curator of anthropology for the Smithsonian. If you consider an average man of 5 foot 10 inches who requires 2,500 calories a day, Patrick would have raided the cupboards on a daily basis, requiring a calorie count of approximately 6,600. These daily demands would have been financially unsustainable for his mother in the 1700s. By the age of 18, Patrick soon found fame and fortune when he joined the circus and travelled to England. Regrettably, however, he eventually succumbed to numerous complications with the medical condition known as gigantism, and sadly Patrick died on the 8th of September 1806 at the young age of 46. By his wishes, he was buried under 12 foot of rock and requested that his body was not to be used for any scientific or medical research, just requesting to finally rest in peace. However, this was not to be. In 1972, against his last wishes, Patrick's remains were exhumed and examined. He was finally reinterred, but his arm was kept for further medical analysis and is currently being preserved at the Medical Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons in London, in the UK. Driving across the country to the western shores of Lough Neagh in County Tyrone, there does seem to be a higher number of accounts of taller people having lived here. One of those historical characters was Charles Byrne, born in 1761 in an area of Littlebridge at Drumlin, which is approximately 8 miles west of Lough Neagh. Charles, upon seeking fame and fortune, moved to London in 1782 at the age of 21. In his short time in London, he met George III, amongst other famous figures, but sadly, due to his quickly deteriorating health, it was indicated that he turned to alcohol, some suggested for the relief of the pain he was suffering. He died a year later in 1783. Sadly, however, it was more likely that Charles was suffering from diabetes. The water in London in the 18th century was not safe to drink, as the River Thames was both the source of the city's drinking water and a repository of the discharge, so instead his huge thirst was quenched by drinking ale and gin, buckets of the stuff, as was common in those days. Following Burns' death, his body was stolen and sold to John Hunter, one of London's surgeons. The remains of Charles Burn was never sent home. Instead, the story of his short life is captured with the display of his huge skeletal frame in London at the Hunterian Museum. There is no doubt cast at the existence of giants in our past, as his massive frame of a phenomenal 7 foot 8 inches stands visible for all to see. Sadly, the museum is currently closed until 2021, but photographic evidence does exist showing his remains on the display, clearly lifting the subject matter directly from myth and into reality. It is quite possible that the assets of taller skeletal frames were being utilized by the King of Prussia, King Frederick Wilhelm I, 1688 to 1740. His giant army would have come across as quite a wall, psychologically speaking. These giants were known as the Potsdam Giants, and it would suggest the phenomena was a lot more recurrent than today, as the king hired a lot of tall individuals from Ireland for his regiment. However, they more than likely would never have seen battle, and were possibly more a showpiece for the king, a regiment of intimidating-looking giants that would have been too weak for battle. The energy expelled would have been tremendous, and the pains in the joints and muscles debilitating. It would seem the lifespan of these tall individuals did not extend to the same length as a regular human of average height. Understanding now that these people were real and no longer a figment of folklore and myth, there had to be something medically that would help me understand the phenomena in greater detail. Some clues in the reports would whisper of common factors, and it has been suggested could possibly originate from a defective gland in the skull. The pituitary gland, also known as the hypophysis, is a small gland the size of a pea, weighing only half a gram. Situated at the base of the human brain, and often referred to as the master gland, it is of the utmost importance to the function of the human body. Any malfunctions or abnormalities of this industrious and vital gland can have serious effect and lead to dire consequences for the body it inhabits. The main function of this contentious little instrument is to secrete the necessary hormones into our bloodstream that help our system function properly. One of the many fundamental secretions produced by the pituitary gland is a growth hormone-releasing agent, somatotropin. Gigantism, or acromegaly, is a rare disorder that causes abnormal growth, most notable in terms of height. It is caused by overproduction in the pituitary gland of the growth hormone somatotropin. And for the unfortunate sufferers of this condition, the lifespan of pituitary giants was normally shorter due to a greater vulnerability to infections and constant metabolic malfunctions. Most often, the disorder causes the acceleration and overgrowth of the bones and the cartilage, and it stands to reason that those affected would suffer tremendous pain and make every movement for them a very arduous and distressing task. The first formal reports of gigantism date back to over a century ago, and the medical term acromegaly was officially reported untitled by Pierre Marie in 1886. Although this term had not been used previous, there have been numerous documented entries of patients with gigantism much earlier in medical history. The first academic account of the affliction are of Baptiste and Antoine Hugo at the beginning of the 20th century. The records report their heights at 7 foot 5 inches and 7 foot 3 inches, and along with the symptoms of hypogonadism, the underproduction of the hormone testosterone, and prognathism, a protrusion of the lower jaw, it was revealed after Antoine's post-mortem exam that he had enlarged internal organs and osteoporosis. Baptiste died at the young age of 27, while Antoine lived until he was 40. Recent studies of this rare medical condition uncovered a unique gene abnormality in the people from East Tyrone and South Derry in Northern Ireland, which would certainly tie in with accounts of the previously mentioned Charles Byrne. Also, the areas surrounding Dungannon, Coal Island, Cookstown and Macrofelt are of particular interest, as a number of people from these areas have been diagnosed with symptoms similar to those of the condition. It has been identified that the former Mr. Byrne and those currently diagnosed from the area have a particular DNA mutation that caused their growth to be affected. This mutation of DNA can be genetically inherited. Luckily enough, thanks to modern medicine and early detection in infants, medication and hormone treatment can be used to reduce and control symptoms for anyone diagnosed in this day and age. And 80% of gigantism cases that are caused by the most common type of pituitary tumour can be cured with surgery. This is a very good prognosis for sufferers who will certainly ensure a longer lifespan for present and future sufferers of this disease, but I am compelled to feel compassion and pity for those poor souls of the past that were inflicted, for the accounted and unaccounted misfortunates that suffered and died from the disease at the peak of their youth, long before this world was ready to let them go. As I draw the line under the subject of Irish giants and stripped away the myth from fact, I am left contemplating on the old stories of giants and how they were no doubt wrongly depicted. The stories of old have characterized them in the light which has delivered them a great injustice. Currently, in the USA, Ukrainian-born Igor Vovkovinsky is the tallest person living in the United States. It was also revealed Vovkovinsky also has a tumour pressing on his pituitary gland, causing the release of excessive amounts of growth hormone into his body. In the heartbreaking documentary filmed by 60 Minutes, Igor describes the price of his mighty overall height.
Sometimes I have pain that's so severe, in my head I have a picture of a truck keeps running over my leg, sometimes 3-4 hours at a time. It's hard to breathe, I see black spots, my heart starts hurting. There have been weeks where I basically don't get off the couch.
Knowing what we know now, if we consider the famous story of David and Goliath, we are reminded through artwork time and time again of a laughing giant challenging the meagre shepherd David. But if we are to re-evaluate the story using the facts, Goliath may have been nothing more than a token of the army's might. A young man, most likely between 18 and 24, frightened, wearing ill-fitting armour, if at all, and suffering pain, physical weakness, and tunnel vision. The true story behind the giants is a real and heartbreaking drama which is still happening today. The effects of acromegaly show without a shadow of a doubt the height and disfigurement which afflict these individuals. So to my original question, did giants exist? Then the answer is a definitive yes. Do they still exist today? Absolutely. Were there 9 feet, 10 feet, or even 15-foot tall giants? These accounts should be categorically left in myth. But then again, when did the truth ever get in the way of a good story?